Good morning, fellow Rotarians, and good morning, all of our guests who are with us this morning. Thanks for being here this morning. I'm Dave Basel, I'm president of the Rotary Club of Hudson, and now I'd like to invite Kelly Brennan for our invocation.
What's that?
The music's up pretty loud.
I like it. Good morning.
Good morning.
Let's take a moment to remember all the religions, represented in the worldwide Rotary family. Let us recall that when we were invited to join Rotary, we were not asked if we were Protestant, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, Catholic, or Buddhist. What we were not asked, because all religions are welcome to the Rotary family. Please join me in a moment of reflection with these words. People are often unreasonable and self-centered. Forgive them anyway. If you're kind, people may accuse you of an ulterior motive. Be kind anyway. If you're honest, people may cheat you. Be honest anyway. If you find happiness, people may be jealous. Be happy anyway. To do the good you do today may be forgotten tomorrow. Do good anyway. Give the world the best you have, and it may never be enough. Give the best you have anyway. For you see, in the end, it's between you and God. It was never between you and them anyway. Amen.
Thank you, Kelly. And James Field to lead us in the pledge and the four-way test, and I guess the music could be worse.
Can we have something more patriotic for them? Okay, pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And now our formal test. First, is it true? Second, is it fair to all concerned? Third, will it build goodwill and friendships? Fourth, will be beneficial to all concerned. And then, while we're up, I have a proposal, maybe Catherine, you could pass it on, that we have Brian Welch do all this to start each day at the high school, including the song.
Thank you, James. And in the absence of Dick Pearsall to lead us in song today, Chris Barker.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Oh, all right. I thought maybe we played piano along with this music. Yeah, all right, America is kind of my go-to. So we're going to sing America. Oh, beautiful for spacious skies, for amber waves of grain, for purple mountains' majesty, above the fruited plain. America, America, God shed His grace on thee, and crowned thy good with brotherhood, from sea to shining sea. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. It's always a nice way to start our mornings. And now, if you would introduce our guests, Chris.
Okay, we have some wonderful guests with us today, some of our favorites. We have the Hudson Service Learning co-teachers, Lonnie Banner and Marty Bach.
Good morning, Lonnie.
And along with them today are two of their students, Ariana, who's been helping us on AV all month, thank you, and Sydney Booth. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Secretary Chris. Just a reminder, I sent around an email forwarded from Gail Royster. If anyone is interested in participating with the Service Learning class on their public policy presentations, please reach Marty Bach directly. You can just email him back from that link in the email and let him know. Sounds like a very, very interesting series of topics. So if you have time in your schedule, I would certainly encourage you to participate in that. Any other announcements from any of the members this morning? Okay, with that, Lonnie and Marty, we'd love to hear from the service learning students who are with us.
Right, so good morning, everyone. Good morning. Just to reiterate what was just said, if you are interested in participating in the audience for those policy projects, it'd be great if you just email me. It's largely to provide the students a capstone project to present some public policy initiatives from the global to the district level. So they're essentially they're a little basic. They're not as full as obviously a major piece of legislation would be, but it gives them an idea how to present in front of a group. And if they get questions from people who are not their peers, provides a different perspective, right? Rather than just all the questions coming from 17 and 18-year-olds. So thank you. Today, we have two students with us, as usual. We have Ariana and Sydney, who are going to talk about their experience in service learning. So without further ado, I turn it over to Ariana.
Hi, everybody. I'm Ariana Bankovic. I've been in service learning since the beginning of senior year. My site first semester was Inner City Akron Head Start. That was awesome, and now I'm at Streetsboro Middle School. A funny experience that I've had at a Head Start is obviously when you walk into a Head Start, you have 18 new little friends. So I walked in one day. This was after they had gotten to know me a little bit, and they were outside for recess. And I open up the door and they all come running and they're all like down here on you. And they come running up to me and they all grab me, and there were so many of them that I fell over. And I was like on the floor and there were like children all over me. But that was a good experience that I had. But I think I was thinking about this last night, I think, and I was really trying to pinpoint what I learned specifically, because there were so many things, but I couldn't really like specifically think of what I learned. And I really think my biggest lesson was just that we're all products of our environment, and who we are really is kind of shaped by our how we grew up and how we were nurtured, I guess. As for college, I wish I knew where I was going. I'm debating between Ohio State and Florida State, and I would like to do nursing. So yeah.
Good morning, my name is Sydney Booth. I'm also in the service learning program. My first semester site was at Leggett Elementary School in inner city Akron, Ohio as well. And then my second semester service learning site is at Gardens Western Reserve in Streetsboro. And I want to become a teacher. My mom's a teacher, and I've always aspired to be a teacher, you know, going in her classroom every day and helping her. So it was really interesting and very fruitful experience to be in a classroom with fifth graders and to learn everything that comes with teaching at an inner city school. One of my favorite memories is I came in the school, and every Wednesday I came into school and they were just like, Sydney! And I was so excited to see them, and it made me happy to be there with them. I have learned an abundance amount of lessons from there. I know, you know, like Ari was saying, you really are a product of your environment. But just to have that lesson in that background of working with inner city kids made me solidify my passion for teaching even more. And just made me so excited for my future as a teacher, and just really pinpoint where I want to teach. You know, I want to teach at more of an inner city school as well, and get those lessons and just put a smile on these kids' faces, because I saw how much the teacher did that for them and how they were looking forward to coming to school. And it was really a fruitful experience for me. For college, I will be attending John Carroll University in fall. And I'm very excited. I'm going to major in secondary education and mathematics. Thank you.
Did we have any questions for either Ariana or Sydney? Okay. Thank you, ladies. And certainly a testament to the quality of the young people in our community and the futures to which they aspire. So good luck, and we're certain that you'll do amazingly well. Next, Joseph Patowski, if you would introduce today's speaker.
Good morning, Rotarians. Good morning. It's my pleasure to tell you a little bit about Dr. James Stanley, who is a fellow inmate of this institution here. He's married to Carol Stanley. He has 2 children, one in Ohio and one in Massachusetts, and 5 grandchildren. That outdoes me by 1. He got his bachelor's from Asbury College in Kentucky. He got his master's from Central Michigan University, my alma mater. He got his PhD from the School of International Service at American University in Washington, D.C., with areas of concentration in theory of international relations, international law, U.S. foreign policy, and international affairs of Western Europe. He also taught at the University of Virginia. He was also a part-time instructor in political science at Cleveland State. He taught as a professor at the University of Akron and was acting director of the Center of Conflict Management at Akron. Then he went over to Kent State University, where he taught not alongside, but with my son, who was a professor of technical theater. He also taught at Malone College and at Hong Kong Baptist College under a Fulbright Hayes Award. He also taught at American University and, like myself, was a public school educator. He has presented to numerous academic and civic and religious organizations and presented lecture series at Lakeside, Ohio for several years, 8 to 10 lectures, and he's done a great job for us here at Laurel Lake. He's presented on 2, 3, or 4 occasions now topics of interest to our group. Rotarians, I give you Dr. James G. Stanley.
I must confess that the doctorate serves well.
So to advance, you sit back. Go back.
Good. Thank you. Okay. The doctorate serves well in academic settings. In a setting here such as Laurel Lake, gym works better. So that is what I would prefer. I think it's important that we understand that even world affairs has its element of humor. And I appreciate the cartoonists who remind us of that every now and then. Hagar is one of the go-to cartoons every morning that I take a look at them. And a few months back, I found this particular cartoon. You see, you can have an excuse if you have to come in late at night. You've been discussing world affairs. Hans Morgenthau, if we could drop that just a hair. Thank you. Hans Morgenthau is a patron saint of mine in the field of international politics, professor at the University of Chicago, and just a little short guy. I met him twice within 30 minutes, and he was so impressed with me that he didn't remember me the second time. But when we talk about international politics, he would argue that international politics, like all politics, is the pursuit of power. Now let's understand that when we're talking about realistic international politics, we're talking about national interest. And the national interest of the United States and the national interest of China or India or Russia are going to be different. And at times they are going to conflict. At times they may be similar. Yeah, let's see. I ran into an article by Jessica Tuckman Matthews the other day. It was book review in the New York Times, and she was reviewing 3 books. One of them was Mr. Flynn's book. Mr. Flynn has been in the news in the last couple days, and she was taking a look at his book as well. But Jessica Tuckman Matthews says that over the last 70 years or so, the United States has pursued these general principles. These are the kind of the fundamental policies that we as a nation have pursued. For example, the recognition to the United States that allies and alliances are important. Now, goodness sakes, coming out of the 1940s and into the 1950s, we had NATO, we had CENTO, CETO, ANZUSPAC, and a whole bunch of others that represented our particular concern of having allies, and of course the Cold War helped to stimulate that as well. Secondly, the global economy is actually beneficial. And to participate in a global economy is important, both for open trade and for investment. You begin to shut yourself off from other countries, and pretty soon you're finding yourself having difficulties. And lastly, Americans have believed that democracy in the long run is better than authoritarian governments or dictatorships, and we try to change a few of those now and then. We do run into some problems, and I'll share some of those problems with you in a few minutes, but keeping in mind that we like democracy here in the United States, but however, when we get involved in international politics, the nature of the regime is not as important as two important values, and that is order and predictability. International politics loves predictability. Now, one of the problems we're running into at the present time is that our particular administration is very unpredictable, and that is not necessarily a good thing. There was a book published, in the mid-'80s. Paul Kennedy wrote a book, Rise and Fall of Great Powers. And I have used that over the years in my courses and some other activities. But he argues that great powers have certain characteristics. The first characteristic is you have a strong military. Now, if you are going to be a great power, you have to flex some muscles here and there, okay? You have to do this in order to demonstrate to the rest of the world that, in fact, you have something to offer. Secondly, you've got to have a strong economy. You've got to have an economy to help support that strong military, plus keep the people at home happy. Thirdly, good credit. Now let's just take a quick note. At the present time, the U.S., I would argue, has a strong military, strong economy, and good credit. We can still borrow. In the 1970s and 80s, you noticed that the Soviet Union began to significantly weaken. They had a strong military, a terrible economy, and no credit. And as a result, a part of the consequence of that was the collapse of the Soviet Union at that point. Now, there's one other characteristic that I would add, and that is you have worldwide interests. You have concerns that represent all parts of the world in one form or another. And so there is a real sense in which if you're going to be a great power, and I would argue we are at this point, you have those kinds of concerns. But let me suggest one other thing. You're going to notice in this list that they represent a whole range of issues that circle the globe. And these are the kinds of issues that our current administration is having to deal with. Now, we might even increase number 3 there. Of course, we're concerned with the Russian invasion of the Crimea and also their attempts in eastern Ukraine. But in the last couple days. They've been sending their jets flying over U.S. destroyers in the Black Sea and have moved cruise missiles into the eastern portions of Russia in violation of treaty agreements. So the Russians are already testing us. And we're going to find out whether or not that relationship that exists between our president and Mr. Putin is indeed a positive one or not. But you'll notice that there is a whole range, everything from economic to wars to competition with China. And we have a whole series of concerns to be talking about. I would like to give you a little geography lesson this morning. Not that you need it, but that I thought we could take a look at what I would refer to as geographic and strategic points around the globe. And if you're going to be a great power and you have worldwide interests, these places are important to you, regardless of the geography. The first, obviously, the Panama Canal. We can understand that. If you want to go from the East Coast to the West Coast or vice versa, the quicker way is through the Panama Canal. You really don't want to go down around Chile and Argentina and the bottom of South America. And militarily, that is a critical place for the United States. Now let's look at some other locations. At the bottom, Bar Bab el Mandeb is the very narrow location. It's right there at Djibouti, and of course Somalia is close by, and a couple others that elude me at the moment. At my age, you have seen your moments. And so I quickly refer to those. Of course, up here on the left, you have the Suez Canal. Now, the Suez Canal is critical, and we understand that. And the Egyptians do a pretty good job of running that. And of course, everybody goes through the Suez Canal, and we keep it that way, and we like the stability of that. But if you need to shut off the Suez Canal, all you need to do is drop a couple capital ships right there in the channel, and you've closed it off. So it becomes a critical point. Straits of Hormuz over to the right, and we have been following that over the last 15, 20 years too. That is the route that a great deal of oil takes from Iran, Iraq, and other locations into the Indian Ocean, and then from whencever it goes. Europe. One of my favorites, we'll get to in a moment, but of course, we have Gibraltar, and the British controlled that. Spain and Morocco could have some input into that, but nevertheless, the British still hold on to that. At the top circle represents the Skagerrak. It is a body of water that separates Denmark from Sweden, and it is very narrow, and it is one of the three ways in which the Russians can get their navy out into the big oceans. They have to leave whatever ports they have in the Baltic and come out through the Skagerrak into the North Atlantic. Of course, there is the English Channel, which is swimmable, although not many people do it. It's close to 20 miles, I believe, at some of its narrower points. But the one on the bottom right is the one I want to mention to you, because that air flight over the destroyer the other day was in the Black Sea. And of course, the Black Sea is the location of the Crimea, and the Crimea is the territory the Russians just occupied a couple years ago. But if you are going to go from the Black Sea into the Mediterranean, you have to go through the Aegean Sea, but more importantly, you have to go through the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. Now, I took the liberty of showing a photograph that is not mine, but a photograph of Constantinople and just how narrow that river is and that separation is going through. Now, this is an old photograph from decades back, but it shows you that that's a pretty narrow waterway. And I would argue that it's very important for the U.S. to keep the Bosporus and the Dardanelles open. It allows us to go into the Black Sea. It also allows the Russians to come into the Mediterranean. In fact, the Russians brought their one big aircraft carrier into the Mediterranean a few months back. Then they had some serious problems with it and had to be escorted all the way around Spain and home the long way. But one of the reasons we remain sympathetic to Turkey and want to keep Turkey as a good friend is because they control the Bosporus and the Dardanelles. And keeping Turkey in NATO is a real issue and a real problem. In the Far East, the Japanese Sea, right between Japan and Korea. In the middle, you have the Straits of Taiwan, and at the bottom, you have the Straits of Malacca. Important waterways, sea lanes. That's where a lot of your commercial traffic is going, through those particular narrow waterways. And that becomes a very critical feature and why the U.S. has the 7th Fleet and the 5th Fleet and a few other fleets, it seems like, here and there around the world. We're protecting our commercial interests, and at the same time, we're protecting the commercial interests of other countries. I want to just point out the red line is representative of what the Chinese are claiming as their right to participate and set up island bases and so forth, all the way down to Brunei and Malaysia, past the Philippines, past Vietnam. That's quite an extension. And very frankly, that's where some of the island bases the Chinese are building, and we're not particularly happy about that. And we keep flying airplanes overhead, and we keep sailing naval ships past, just to remind the Chinese that we still have the right to the ocean. Some truisms of international politics, some things that are always true, generally. Everyone is an expert. We all have our ideas about what the president should do about this, that, or the other. It is much easier to start a war than to end it. That's so obvious, it almost hurts to hear it, but it's true. It's easy to get in, it's harder to get out. And Afghanistan, Iraq represent a couple examples. It is much easier to get rid of a leader than to ensure someone who is better. How do you do that? The Cleveland Browns have been trying that for years. And they still haven't figured that one out. Maybe, hopefully they have. But that's also true in international politics. Today's enemy is tomorrow's ally. We fought Japan and Germany in World War II. They are two of our best friends, or not friends, allies today. Today's ally may very well be tomorrow's enemy. That's the way it works. It works on the basis of national interests and common interests. I think it was de Gaulle who made the comment, France has no friends, only allies. We Americans, we like to talk in terms of friendship. The harsh reality is we too only have allies. Allies are those who share interests with us. If they no longer share interests with us, we raise questions about our friendship and our alliances. In any conflict, on whose side is God? God is generally on the side of the better generals, the more troops, the better gunpowder, stronger Navy, and better resources. However, every side in any conflict is always claiming God is their source of inspiration. International law, there's two types of international law, public and private. Private international law is that which governs you and me when we travel abroad, or corporations. Public international law, the laws of the sea, the laws of war, and so on. That type of governmental interaction. In public international law, we tend to adhere to the law when it serves our interest. If it doesn't serve our interest to abide by international law, we don't. Pay attention to what leaders do, not what they say, what they do. Their actions, their decisions, not necessarily their verbiage. And I spoke of order and predictability a while ago. If you're going to invest large amounts of money in a foreign country, you want to make sure that it's a fairly stable economic and political system, don't you? You don't want it in chaos. Last, two more. Expect the unexpected. One of the things you want to do in international politics is try to minimize the area of surprise. Anytime an administration tells you they are surprised by the actions of another government, no, they have not paid attention. They're not paying attention to the intelligence, to the factors that are taking place in that country. They're not up to date. And lastly, if you initiate action, there is always some form of reaction, blowback. Whoops, wrong way. This was the cover of Economist magazine a few years ago, and I frankly thought it represented very well what the current administration is experiencing right now in terms of trying to catch up. You'll notice Uncle Sam has 6 arms. He could probably use a few more. But there is a lot to understand about the world out there, and it is a dangerous place, but it is also a wonderful place to travel and to experience. With that, my comments are complete, and I'll be happy to take any questions. I don't promise, well, I do promise to give you an answer. Mr. Rich, sir.
Jim, I appreciate very much.
I hear.
Okay. I'm very much interested in the South China Sea that you're pointing out as being a very current point of contention. And given the fact that the Chinese don't have petroleum resources or adequate, they have to import, aren't they particularly vulnerable there, whereas we're frightening them, they're afraid to admit? What should we do to avoid contention in the South China Sea?
Maintaining a presence to begin with. And secondly, some of those islands that they're developing out there are actually being developed for the purpose of, double purpose, I suppose, protecting their sea lanes for oil supplies. And I'm not sure about this, but I'm thinking there is the prospect of petroleum reserves under the sea there. I don't know that, but I think I have heard that, but don't quote me on it. So the Chinese very much are beginning to extend what they would consider their sphere of influence. They're coming into young adulthood in terms of superpower status, and they're flexing some muscles. And so they're trying to extend themselves and extend their influence, particularly in Southeast Asia and with the Philippines, and also keep the pressure on Taiwan.
Yeah, I had a question. When you talk about pay attention to what leaders do rather than what they say, so it seems like you have 2 types of world leaders out there: those who do pound the desk and make broad statements, but actually, as you said, may not actually be acting that way. And then others, and usually it's the President of the United States, are more nuanced in how they describe situations. So now we're experiencing a president who is not nuanced in how he describes situations. Is that beneficial, or does that cause problems, or what sort of, how does that make a difference? Or do other world leaders, if the president makes a pronouncement, do they just wait to see what the actual actions are?
Leadership is a critical point when it comes to some of the intangible elements of national power, the quality of leadership. I think what I would say to begin with is that with the firing or resignation, however you describe it, of Mr. Flynn, the National Security Advisor, European governments are really throwing up their hands and are really upset. Not because they like Mr. Flynn all that much, but because it represents instability. And what do we do now kind of response. I hesitate to get into too much national politics, but very simply, the White House is in chaos. at the present time, and foreign governments see that. And it is representing some very serious problems for us. It's allowing, if you will, Mr. Putin to take the actions of jet flyovers and moving military equipment to where it should not be. So he's testing us, and it'll be interesting to see how we respond to the test.
You indicated world leaders, if they say they're surprised, haven't been paying attention. In a situation where you have great unpredictability, such as is being perceived in the United States right now, how do those two play off against each other? Because you have world leaders dealing with a very unpredictable situation. How do they not be surprised?
How is the confusion in Washington playing out with the need for leaders and foreign governments' desire for order and predictability? With some difficulty. I have every confidence that there are many diplomats in Washington rushing around trying to figure out what on earth is going on and trying to communicate with their governments back home and trying to keep things settled to the extent that is possible. There is one positive note I would suggest, and that is that on some issues, the president has backed off of some of his earlier comments and has begun to moderate. He's accepted, at least publicly, the one China policy, which China is pleased about. With Israel, it's going to be interesting to see whether or not he holds on to the two-state solution or buys into what Netanyahu would have him pursue, and that would be a one-state direction. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. He's also reaffirmed NATO commitments, which I think was pretty much a given to begin with. But other governments, they're really just sitting back and having to wait and see how this all plays out. And if you read the news this morning, it isn't playing out any more calm. It's getting worse.
I feel that if the media would back off and quit recording everything that they think has been happening, I think things would be a little bit more peaceful. What do you think?
I'm a defender of the media. It's hard to blame the messenger, although it's often easy to do. And there are some messengers that I appreciate but more than others. The problem, I would argue right now, is that the media smells blood in the water, and they are going to be relentless. And our media is relentless once they get that scent. And so I would argue just hold on. Hold on to whatever you can hold on to and see how this all works out. Yes?
In today's world, we have the advantage of on our we have an international PBS channel.
Yes.
And in recent years, I've enjoyed watching those two networks, DW, which is out of Berlin, and France 24, which are both English-speaking broadcasts around the world. And I've started watching them a couple years ago, and you get a very interesting perspective on the news in those countries. And I would say that what I've seen in the last year or so is in both Germany and France, there's been a lot, even before Trump was elected, there's a lot of what we see in our country going on in both those countries for the same, for various and similar or dissimilar reasons. And I think if you take advantage of what's available to us, you'll see we have a tendency to sit here and think that we're the only ones in the world that the lid's coming off, okay? Which is, of course, not true. But I think that's an advantage we have in today's world that I would recommend everybody on it's on Time Warner, it's 994 if you, but do you watch that at all? Or do you take advantage of that, or?
I must confess I have not. I have tried to watch Al Jazeera a few times and have trouble getting it. I certainly would follow up and suggest that that's a great thing to do, and I would encourage others to do it, including myself. Finding a perspective that comes from a different part of the world. The introduction suggested I was in Hong Kong for a year, and I was teaching Chinese students. My wife and I were in Hong Kong. We represented only 6% of the world's population at that time. The United States is not the bulk of the world's population. However, we use the bulk of the world's resources. But getting a sense of what is going on in other countries, yes, Prime Minister May and the threat of Le Pen in France and the movement to the right is a real concern.
Same thing in Germany.
Yeah, yeah.
And in Spain. And
And part of the issue here is this whole immigration. The problem of Syrians and others coming up through south of Europe into these countries. And the European market has tended to make that possible. Mimi.
Yeah, I'm wondering, a lot of the change, particularly the movements to the right in Europe, represent the increasing divide between those who have and those who don't. It's a lot of it is economically driven.
Yes.
And so we now have a regime in this country that initially purported to represent those who don't, but the bait and switch becomes ever more transparent. And I think the confusion in the rest of the world over what that means is increasing. So what do you think has to happen here, and will it happen, to make the rest of the world less nervous, particularly the Russians and the Chinese? You know, I understand that the Russians had a ship off Delaware last night. So they're watching. So what's your prediction for?
I don't worry too much about Russian ships off of Delaware. The reason, very simply, is they're on the high seas. They have a right to be there. We do the same thing. We have ships off the coast of Russia. We have submarines off the coast of Russia. It's a game we all play.
Yeah. My point of observing that is it's not something that's happened recently. It's just another indication on the part of the Russian government that we're watching you more closely.
I think a lot of the problem we're seeing in some of the European countries, and we're going to see more of it here, is the problem of the haves and the have-nots, the economic disparities that are being created. It's been getting worse for the last 30, 40 years, and politicians talk about it, but nobody wants to do anything about it, largely because most of your congressmen are millionaires anyway. So there's some real issues there. Why would they want to raise their own taxes? I probably ought to stop at this point because you folks have been sitting long enough, and I've said enough. So with that, I'll complete.
Thanks, Jim. Certainly an interesting and timely topic. So thank you very much for being here. It'll be interesting times to watch going forward, as they say. That's absolutely right. Well, there's a choice, but I don't necessarily like the choice. I'd like to thank the greeters today, Mimi Becker and Ron Barnhouse. And as always, thanks to all of the members who helped with the audio-visual setup, Den Rich, James Field, Tom Page, Tom Tobin, and Ron Barnhouse. Ariana Bankovich, thank you very much for being here again today and helping with the audiovisual setup so that we can broadcast these meetings, Hudson Cable Television. And I would like to thank all of the folks who are watching Hudson Cable Television for tuning in and watching. And I would invite you to come join us some Wednesday morning, have breakfast, and participate in our meeting with us. And be present to ask questions of speakers, because the Q&A, as you can tell from this morning, can be very lively and very interesting. Today's Rotobuck drawing. The payout is $8. The jackpot is $270. Jim, if you would make one of our members. The last four digits, 8935. 8935.
All right, I'm going to score this. Oh, that has an edge on it. That's not black?
That's not black.
Oh.
Sorry. I did put my contact lens in this morning. I can tell you it's not black. Okay. This morning, President's Day is coming up next week, so a couple of comments from two presidents. The first, a president that I never thought of as particularly witty, and I'll let you try and guess who said this. If one morning I walked on top of the water across the Potomac River, the headline that afternoon would read, "President Can't Swim."
Sounds like Ford.
Lyndon Baines Johnson. And a little bit more positive and thought-provoking from President George H.W. Bush. If anyone tells you America's best days are behind her, they're looking the wrong way. And with that, I thank everybody for being here. Have a great day.